Alright folks, how you doing? So it's been a while since I read from the book William Wallace, Robin Hood Revealed. So this is Wallace defeats Corspatrick, Beck and Bruce. Good Wallace thought long and hard of how best to govern Scotland by choosing the wisest men to appoint as sheriffs and captains. Some of his relatives and others of true blood he placed in office. He appointed his dear cousin Crawford, keeper and captain of Edinburgh, and left with him good men to keep the town. Crawford had good heritage in manual at that time. Scotland, which had long been under the English yoke, was now free, won by Wallace from our false enemies. As great governor of Scotland he remained, waiting for the return of his righteous king from the grip of Englishmen, who wrongly kept him from his crown. This is referring, of course, to King Robert the Bruce. For 5 months, Scotland stood in good rest. The lords of the land thought it best to call a council to be held in St. Johnston. Priests, barons and burghers assembled there, but Corspatrick did not come to partake. He remained at Dunbar and made scorn at them all. They spoke of him in foul terms at that parliament, and then Wallace put them to a question. Will all men here consent to granting him forgiveness for all things past, so that he will come, and although he has trespassed, gain his assurance that from here on he will stay loyal to Scotland? Now this is a hell of a move here by Wallace, because Corspatrick was the one who opened the gates when Beck was sacked by King Edward Longshanks in 1296, and he was also the one who treacherously locked up the leaders of the four leaders of even the Scottish army prior to the massacre at the Battle of Dunbar. And Wallace was actually present at that battle, so this is a very telling sign of Wallace's character, you know. And Wallace was a practicing Christian. He was a Catholic. I've even made videos about why he should be considered a Roman Catholic saint before. I'll link them in the description below. And this is one of the reasons, you know, because he is genuinely a bona fide 100% Christian. And there's a footnote here. The minstrel is supported in his claim that Corspatrick sent a letter of reply to Wallace. It is recorded in the Tower Records, Caledonia, Volume 2, page 246. Now that's very interesting, because this morning I heard from my old rival, Jed Skeptic, where he was saying, you know, sardonically, sarcastically, that in one of my videos about Wallace's daughter, I quoted from Caledonia instead of my Robin Hood crap, which I'm reading from here. Well, Jed, even the Robin Hood crap is citing Caledonia, your book. I don't know how it's your book since you didn't write it, but the book that he uses as a source. So once again, Jed Skeptic tries to come at me, and once again, slapped them down. It's been a while since I did that, but there you go. Anyway, let's get back to the book here. This is oh wait, I've skipped a little bit here. They all agreed to this, priest, baron and burgher, giving their whole consent in writing. They humbly implored him, as being a peer of the land, to come and take some hand in the governance of Scotland. Corspatrick, when he received the letter, laughed in scorn, then sent his reply. Seldom have I seen such a message. Now that Wallace rules the land, we have great need of a real prince or king. That King of Kyle I do not recognise. From him I have never held a furrow of land. He thinks his good fortune cannot change, but it will not last very long. Unfortunately, this prediction proves to be true. As for you, lords, understand this, I am not obliged to answer your call. Also, I am free to reign in this region as lord of my own lands, and ever did any prince. I also own great lands in England, and pay rent to no man. What will you now do? I warn you, and as for your summons, I choose to ignore it and will give no further reply. Ooh, somebody's got a stick up his ass, hasn't he? I mean, what a prick this guy is. Why would you want this guy on your side? It's quite telling, though, what he's saying, that he doesn't pay rent. Oh, I guess that's because he opened the gates at Berwick and allowed the English in to massacre 7,500 Scots, at least 7,500, and locked up the 4 leaders of the Scots army at Dunbar. The reward of treason and treachery. The letter was read before the Scottish Parliament. Wallace was outraged, for well he understood that Scotland should have its righteous king reigning over his subject. "A king of Kyle," said Wallace. "Lords, this is one uncouth case. If Corspatrick is allowed to flaunt the authority of this Parliament and heap insult upon us, well, I think it's mostly insult upon you, Wallace, then we are no better off than we have been lately. God has let us suffer his taunts as a penance. We shall capture him dead or alive. If alive, we shall make him swear to be loyal to Scotland. If we do not, then we will be shamed in history for lack of action. I vow to God he will not rest at ease in this land while both he and I live, unless he comes and acknowledges his rightful king. There is not room for the two of us in Scotland. He shall repent his scorn and sorrow unless I leave this life, where I am ordained to have no rest. Now let God be the judge, as he knows best what is right. Wallace left the assembly with a party of 200 men he had brought with him from St. Johnstone, which is Perth nowadays, the capital during this time. Before doing that, he assured the council not to have fear of any false ambitions on his part. I am but one, and I leave now for a good cause. They rode towards Kinghorn, which is on the coast of Fife. The next morning they crossed the River Forth by ferry. Robert Lauder met Wallace at Musselburgh, which town he had defended well against Englishmen. They had tried to bribe him to break faith with Scotland and become Edward's man, but he remained for always a true man. He gladly joined Wallace to go against Corspatrick. Good men had also come with Crystal of Seaton. Wallace's force now swelled in number to 400. A squire named Lyle, who knew the land well, came to Wallace with 20 others, meeting him at Linton. He told Wallace that Corspatrick had gathered with a strong force at Cockburn's Path, and they would be riding soon for Dunbar. Lauder offered a suggestion. I think it would be best if we reached Dunbar before him. Wallace replied, we may ride at leisure. With his power on hand, he hopes to strike a bargain. We should understand there is not a hardier lord in Scotland. If we could persuade him to be true and steadfast by both his wit and with force, he could do great things. Sadly, he is a wilful man, and because of this he is likely to lose himself. Now, it's very telling of Wallace's idealism and naivete that he's even willing to give Corspatrick a second chance, because I sure as hell wouldn't be, but, you know, especially if I was present at a battle where he caused my army to be, well, Wallace wasn't the leader of the Scots army at that time, but he was in the Scots army when they were crushed at Dunbar. You know, he was witness to the massacre at Berwick. You know, it's very telling of Wallace's character, both positively and negatively, that he's even considering this. Thus they rode forth. As they came near to the east of Dunbar, some men told Wallace that Corspatrick knew of his approach. He had chosen a field in a valley near Ennerwick and waited there with 900 men. Wallace's force soon approached to their sight. Little love did either side have, one toward the other. When they caught sight of each other, both sides charged without restraint. The fighting was fierce, dangerous, and continued for a long time, with many chivalrous deeds. Many brave men of Scottish blood died there. This was a sad affair, therefore I do not wish to dwell upon it. It was a great pity that Scot fought with Scot. Eventually Corspatrick left the field with only a small number. They passed along Cockburn's Path. The Earl sore aggrieved that his men had tasted defeat. Wallace with his force headed for Dunbar, and was told that no food was left in the castle or men to defend it. All of Corspatrick's men had taken to the battlefield. When Wallace heard this report, he took Dunbar easily, meeting no resistance. He made Crystal of Seaton captain of Dunbar Castle, stuffed it well with food and plenty of men. In the morning, Wallace and 300 men set out along Cockburn's Path. Corspatrick saw his approach and fled to Bonkhill Wood. Wallace ranged his men around the wood, but Corspatrick escaped out from it and passed to Norham at great speed. When Wallace saw that Corspatrick had escaped, he decided it was futile to continue. He rode to Coldstream and lodged there for the night. Earl Corspatrick, seeing that Wallace and his men were resting, seized his opportunity of making complete his escape. He rode through Ettrick Forest quickly. Wallace roused his men and they gave chase once more. He found that he had too few men to place a cordon round the forest, as it was 7 miles broad and 14 long. Corspatrick rested at Cockholm, while Wallace rode to the west to find more men. Corspatrick hurried into England to gain support from Bishop Beck, telling the bishop that Wallace was coming. Wallace had put Beck out of Glasgow and had slain his fellow countryman, Lord Percy. See the video I made about that, the Battle of the Bell and the Bray. Incidentally, Lord Henry Percy was not slain at that battle. That's an error on the part of the minstrel. Beck hated Wallace for this. The bishop soon raised an army in Northumberland and encouraged Bruce to rise in arms to win the crown of Scotland. They had deceived Bruce, making him believe that Wallace intended taking the crown for himself. They were full of lies, and ever yet have been. Honour and truth was always in Wallace. All that he took on hand was to defend the rights of others, and he hoped to bring Bruce back to Scotland, where he could claim his kingship. On this matter I will not tarry. The English gathered a large army, assembling from Water to Tweed. They numbered as a land army 30,000. From Tynemouth they sent ships to blockade Dunbar, so that Crystal of Seaton could get no supplies by sea. Corspatrick set a siege at the castle of Dunbar with 20,000 men. Beck and Bruce bade still with 10,000 at Norham. Wallace gathered a force quickly and came with 5,000 good men of Lothian. He desired to rescue Seaton. That night Wallace camped just below Yester. Hay, and this is Hugo Hay, who held lands in Ayr before 1320, arrived bringing more support. He had been in Dunn's Forest at this time and saw the English army amassing. He brought 50 seasoned fighters, told Wallace the size of Corspatrick's force, and offered some advice. My counsel is we give battle quickly and break him before his army is reinforced with others. Wallace thanked Hay for his encouragement and advice, then told Hay of his own thoughts on the situation. Incidentally, Hay is one of the characters that features in Outlaw King. He's the one with like red hair and a big red beard. He's in that movie if you've seen it. Friend Hay, in deciding, in fact, he's the one when you have the scene of all the lords gathering together. He's the one to say, "Robert, I'm with you." That's Hay. Anyway. Friend Hay, in deciding the right course to follow so that we win, I do not know what is the wisest move. Right true it is that any one of us may die, but as our cause is right, who should be in terror? Corspatrick sent a messenger to Beck, informing him of Wallace's approach. Beck was overjoyed to receive this news of an opportunity to wreak his vengeance on Wallace. Beck rode through Lammermuir and then waited in ambush near the Spotmuir, where Corspatrick had suggested he should be. Wallace, unaware that Beck lay in hiding nearby, approached the Spotmuir and was confronted by Corspatrick's large host. Corspatrick had left the siege of Dunbar Castle, hoping to catch Wallace unawares on a plain battlefield. When Corspatrick had left Dunbar, Seaton had issued out with a few of his best men, leaving the rest to defend the castle. They quickly rode to the Spotmuir to assist Wallace. Some Scots were in dread when they saw the number of Corspatrick's men, 20,000 coming against so few. When Jopp saw their number, he advised Wallace to hold back. "We should not fight them now, but instead ride to some strength. I shall go to raise more men. They are too many in number to encounter." Wallace replied, "In truth, I will not flee, even though they outnumber us 4-1. We are too close to them to make a safe retreat. They could harm us if we become a quarry in a chase. There are at least 20 men here who would meet them in battle, even if I was not here to command them. No matter how many there are, because of our love for God, we are made strong. Yon English folk will not abide long in battle." Both sides charged and fierce fighting erupted when they collided. Hardy sword strokes issued and spears pierced armour. Wallace's men knocked many on horseback to the ground. As the battle progressed, 5,000 English lay dead on the floor. Wallace and his men pressed forward until their foes were ready to fly, but Corspatrick held his ground and gave some heart to his men. Wallace knew that his own men would never flee, even if they remained outnumbered 5-1. In that great strife they received many sore wounds, and blood poured upon the earth. Wallace's host stayed close together in a circle. In whichever direction they pressed, they made a full great slaughter. So they're obviously using the Sheltron spear wall formation. Very clever. Wallace, Graham, Ramsay, Seaton, Richard Lundy, Adam Wallace, Hay, Lyle, Boyd, Barclay, Baird and Lauder slew many of their foes in that stir, but Corspatrick still fought boldly against them. By his hand many Scots were sorely wounded, some losing their lives. Our leaders pressed forward to cut Corspatrick down, laying low many that came between them and their quarry. The Englishmen had begun to flee the field when suddenly Bishop Beck appeared with his force. Along with Beck came Bruce, contrary to his fellow Scots. Wallace was saddened when his eyes beheld Robert Bruce. He was aggrieved more to see Bruce than all the others he had seen come against the Scots that day. The great ambush broke with 10,000 fresh men renewing the English attack. Those who had begun to flee remained to fight alongside Corspatrick. When Wallace saw the ambush, he considered a retreat, but seeing his men looking so sound in their armour, he chose to stay and fight. He hoped to slay their leader before he went. The new host surrounded the Scots, and the fighting grew more intense. The worthy Scots renewed their efforts, slaying many of Beck's men. Wallace's men received injuries, and bold Bruce cut down many of his own countrymen with fierce strokes. Wallace pressed forward in a bid to face Bruce, but numbers of Englishmen came between them. Corspatrick made all haste to reach Wallace, battling through the thick press of men. He caught Wallace with a fierce stroke of his sword, the blade penetrating Wallace's coat of mail and giving him a sore wound. Wallace answered quickly with a sweeping stroke, but Mathland had recklessly come between him and Corspatrick and took the blow instead. It burst open his head, and blood and brain issued from a mortal wound. Wallace's horse was killed, and so he alighted onto his feet. So for all of his greatness as a warrior, Wallace is not invincible. Both Corspatrick and Robert the Bruce wounded him in separate battles, but, he has taken injuries before. Wallace was now isolated, cut off from his men. He was encircled by the enemy, but slew men on all sides as he defended himself skillfully. The Scots could no longer abide and retreated from the field. With sore hearts they rode away. They began to worry when they saw that Wallace was not with them. They did not realise that he was still on the field fighting alone. He was yet making room with his good sword that always helped him in need. There was none strong enough to survive a sword stroke given by Wallace. Corspatrick commanded his men to bring him down with spears. On either side they lunged with spear points. He hewed off the spearheads as they came forward. His men knew little of what was taking place. Some of them came to Sir John the Graham, and when they could not find Wallace, Lauder, Lisle, Hay, Ramsay, Lundy, Boyd, and Crystal of Seaton agreed to take 500 men and go back to the rescue of Wallace. They unhorsed Bishop Beck by causing his horse to rear up magnificently. Before he had regained his feet, they had slain many Englishmen. They rescued Wallace out of the press and horsed him on a stout animal. They fled to his strength with all their might, rescuing many men along the way. Corspatrick and a large number of men gave chase, as they could do little harm. The 500 rode close together. Any pursuer who rode too close paid with his life. They arrived at the strength to find 4,000 of their men already there. This number of survivors pleased Wallace. He hoped to make a good defence at Glaskendale Forest. Corspatrick turned to Beck then when Wallace had escaped, cursing his barred fortune and lost chance. He had won the field, but had lost 7,000 men for the bishop's entire boast. Wallace had lost near 500. No chieftains had been lost, and so his mourning was the less. It was nearly evening, but Beck could not wait upon the field. They marched across Lammermuir and camped in a position they believed would be to their most advantage, for Beck was sure the Scots would attack upon the field where they had last battled. It's worth remembering here, if this sounds a little unrealistic, that the Scots lost so few and the English lost so many. Well, the Scots were veterans, and they were a solid unit who had fought together in many battles, whereas it does stress that the host that Bishop Beck raised was hastily assembled, so probably conscripts and people who were hauled out the dungeons and offered pardons and things like that. So really was basically cannon fodder. This was a hastily assembled army. This wasn't like a royal army raised by the king. Bishop Beck was the king's right hand man in the north. But this was a rushed invasion. It wasn't really properly planned, so it's not so unrealistic when you really think about it. Wallace's countrymen gathered fast. 300 came from Edinburgh, along with Crawford. Many good men arrived from Tiviotdale, and Ruthven came from Jedburgh with some men. Sir William Lang, who was Lord of Douglas, came at night with 80 men. 2,000 men in total had come to swell Wallace's force, hoping to visit vengeance on Scotland's enemies. Wallace and his men marched into Lammermuir, making little commotion. Wallace divided his force into two parts. He ordered Sir John the Graham, Seaton, Lauder, and Hay to ride with 3,000. Wallace led the others. With him were Lundy, Ramsay, Douglas, Barclay, Boyd, and Adam Wallace. By this time it was dawn, with a bright sun coming upon the horizon. So this sounds like a night march. And by the way, when I wrote this chapter in my Wallace novels, I elaborated on it further. I said that Wallace and all his men took all their mail off so that they could sneak up on them as quietly as possible. The Scots soon caught sight of the English camp and saw that their foes were ill prepared, but Beck's men being out of their armour. Wallace quickly attacked, and a great slaughter began. Some were smothered on the ground where they lay. A great noise was raised among them. Sir John the Graham joined his force with Wallace, attacking from a position on the enemy's southern flank. The frightened men of Beck's army could not make a stand, and as many as 5,000 fled. Jopp said it was a sight to behold with joy. Yet Bishop Beck, that foul tyrant, fought in that skirmish awfully and long. See, for all of his faults, Bishop Beck is no coward. He is no coward. I've got a lot of respect for Bishop Beck. A knight named Skelton, a skilful fighter, stood in his shining armour beside Beck, fighting with all his might to defend his Lord Bishop. Also interesting that a bishop's fighting in a battle. Medieval Christianity was quite a different animal from Christianity nowadays. Lundy saw Skelton and met him with his good sword. He gave the knight a blow which cut through armour and split his head asunder. Skelton's comrades were astonished by the ease with which Lundy cut down that fierce chieftain. Their hearts failed, and so they left the field. And like I said, Bishop Beck's army was mostly, hastily assembled conscripts. But Bishop Beck himself, he would have surrounded himself with a corps of veterans, which is how it reads here pretty much. But like I said, with Lundy winning this fierce duel one-on-one, these are all veterans. They've been through the wars. A corps of veterans is far more worthwhile. 500 stout soldiers have been through 3 or 4 battles together is worth more than 1,000 conscripts. Corspatrick, Beck and Bruce rode away, leading 5,000 men from the field. They fled to Norham Castle as the Scots pursued and killed the stragglers. As the 3 lords hastened away, a great many they had brought from England were left. At this retreat, near 20,000 Englishmen were killed. See, because the leadership's not looking after them. The Scots chased them so fast that many of them tried to ford the River Tweed in places that were too deep and ended up drowning. Others were cut down with sword and spear. Wallace decided to return when he was informed that Beck had reached the safety of Norham Castle. He was saddened that Bruce had chosen to fight for the English instead of taking his rightful place as King of Scots. Now, anyone who's saying that I'm trying to make Robert the Bruce look good, are you listening? This does not make Robert the Bruce look good. How is this making Bruce look good? It's not. Anyway, Wallace marched on Corspatrick's lands, wasting them. He commandeered goods and had houses that belonged to Corspatrick destroyed, 7 buildings in total that were spread over both the Merse and Lothian. Only the castle of Dunbar was left unharmed. On the 18th day, Wallace reached Edinburgh. The next morning he journeyed to Perth, where the Parliament sat. I don't know why they switched suddenly from St Johnstone to Perth, but anyway. He told the barons how he had fulfilled his vow and removed Corspatrick from Scotland, because Corspatrick would show no loyalty to his native land. The lords were pleased, welcoming Wallace and thanking God for the blessing of his victory. He was appointed governor of Scotland, the whole baronage giving him absolute authority. So Wallace was basically as good as a king at this point. Wallace rewarded men who had risked life and limb to free Scotland with land for their labour. He gave Stanton to Lauder. This land had belonged to Aymer Valance the trader, again another Norman, Scoto-Norman. You see him in Outlaw King as well, where he's depicted as being English, but in fact, Henry the Minstrel says he was Norman, Scoto-Norman. To Lisle he gave the lands of Bergian Crook, and also gave land to Scrimgeour. Footnote here, Alexander Scrimgeour was the son of Colin of Cupar. He was hanged in 1306, along with several others at Newcastle upon Tyne, on the express orders of Edward I. So he was probably captured at Methven, Robert the Bruce's defeat, along with a lot of other nobles at the time. To many other worthy men, Wallace gave towns and lands. He gave no lands to members of his own family, but appointed them to places of high office. No man could accuse Wallace of meanness. He refused reward for himself until the return of Scotland's king. Scotland was happy after so many years of sadness. They set to work to rebuild the land. And that's the end of the chapter. So this is just prior to the invasion of England. So this is kind of between the victory at Stirling Bridge and the time that Wallace actually attacks England. So this is the later stages of the year 1297. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.